Gail Monroe. I'm the head curator of the Navy Art Collection here at the Naval History and Heritage Command. This afternoon we are talking about this little temporary exhibit that we have up here in the Navy Museum on diversity and the Navy. Let's see, Expanding Horizons is the title that we chose for it. And hopefully it reflects the expanding horizons of the Navy. But I will state right up front that I have said to many people that I am not an expert on diversity in the Navy. What I can tell you is I can tell you how and why I pulled together this exhibit, and then we can open it to discussion if you would like to do that. There are many things. There are omissions in this exhibit, and we can talk about why that is. We can talk about, well, we can start right off with, we start the exhibit with Robert Smalls, who is the pilot of the steamboat Planter. Why did I start there? He was a civilian pilot in South Carolina in the Civil War. He stole himself, he was enslaved. He stole himself, his family, another family that worked on the boat, and went out to the Union fort out in the middle of the harbor and gave the boat to the Union cause, and the Army employed him for the rest of the war. Now, was he in the Navy? If you were around here today, we would probably call him a contractor. But in many histories, he is listed as one of the first African Americans in the Navy. But I thought if we're going to start somewhere, we'll start with that. Also, I don't have any representations of women in the Civil War, but in the Civil War, they also started employing women as nurses. So that's when that started. That's an omission in the exhibit for the main reason that you'll hear a lot of times is that the Navy Art Collection, does not have any material that I can use to represent that to you. Like any museum, we're always collecting. We take donations. So if you've got anything in your basement that might help us along with that, we'll be glad, and it's fully tax deductible. Moving on from the Civil War, there was a lot of dead space as far as diversity goes, stasis as far as the Navy goes, not very welcoming atmosphere. But then about 1898, the Navy got involved in the Spanish-American War, which either took place around Cuba or it took place around the Philippines, and we ended up with some territorial possessions, that one of which was the Philippines, and Filipinos became American citizens. By the way, if you hear me say anything wrong, do correct me. I believe they did become American citizens, but the United States Navy decided to start using Filipino nationals in the service. In this case, I have a poster representing that they were recruiting for musicians. Actually, usually Filipinos served in the Navy as mess attendants, and actually, in a lot of cases, replaced African Americans that were serving as mess attendants. Here's an issue for when you're pulling together your own exhibit on diversity. It's like, well, what do you put in the caption? When I was pulling together this caption, someone said to me, well, the reason why the Navy took the Filipinos into the Navy is because it made it easier to discriminate against African Americans. I have no background for that statement. Not going to put it in an exhibit. It's an interesting point of view, probably deserves some research, maybe even a master's thesis. But what I do have is I know that Filipinos were invited into the Navy and came along, served well, for a while we get into women coming into the Navy. Like I say, that you would first see nurses serving as civilians, kind of like contractors again, starting in the Civil War. But the military in general needed nurses in World War I and recruited for them very heavily. This is a recruiting poster from World War I for student nurses, and this was a general recruiting. This wasn't a specifically Navy recruiting effort. So this is a poster from that. And then other women started being accepted into office work. And that is a fairly recent drawing of a uniform of a woman from that era. Moving on around, next one, the Navy's Women in White. It's about nurses of World War II era. You'll notice what's really significant about that image is that the women are not wearing rank insignia, because while they were kind of in the Navy at that point, they did not carry any rank. And next is, let's see, our first portrait. There are some portraits in the exhibit that are significant milestones. We can call them milestones if we like. This is Mildred McAfee. She was hired to basically create the WAVES. WAVES stands for Women Activated for Voluntary Emergency Service. She was an academic. She came into the Navy to start the WAVES, stayed a few years, left. I'm sorry, I'm more thinking about the gap that follows her. Around this time, there was a lot of diversity coming into the Navy. There were women, there were African Americans, there were plenty of rules that were in place as to who could serve where. Mildred McAfee is famous for actually butting heads against some of these rules. Like the Navy or military in general did not want African American women. But she fought pretty hard to bring African American women into the Navy. Now, because society was still segregated, there were limits on where they could serve. But in cases like the Marine Corps, I don't think they got any at all. So it was interesting times. Moving on from there, because I'm not going to chew on your leg all day, is a portrait of Jocko Clark. He is Native American. He's Cherokee, or was Cherokee. We're trying to be inclusive here in our exhibit. We have other portraits of Native Americans, but in the collection. But oddly enough, they're not generally well identified as such. So it was really hard for me to come up with a portrait like this is a Native American I wanted in my exhibit. But Jocko Clark was famous, and actually there are some pretty uncomplimentary images because he was a pretty stern fellow, and so there were uncomplimentary images of him with war paint, war bonnet, but I decided not to put them in this exhibit because it's not a good idea. Moving on around, the next picture is of some messmen serving in World War II. This is a painting done by a combat artist on the scene. It's basically African Americans cooking in an environment, you'll see that they are supervised by a white officer, which is how it worked in those days. I'm just censoring myself at this point. I think you can look at that picture and draw some of your own conclusions. Beyond that, we move on to the Korean War. Hold on, let me back up for a moment. There are great moments in naval history and diversity in naval history that happened in this era that we need to note them in passing, but Dory Miller earned the first Navy Cross. He manned a gun at Pearl Harbor. He was later killed in the war while serving on another ship. Why is he not represented in this exhibit? The Navy Art Collection does not own an image of Dory Miller. You would think that would be something that we would really need to have. It is more, it's a problem when you are working for a collection that relies on donations. There are Dory Miller recruiting posters out there. The one that I saw on the internet recently was going for $5,000. That is way out of my budget for acquisitions. So again, commentary, living in poverty. Let's just put that on the internet. There are also the Tuskegee Airmen, similar issue. I do have more recent images of Tuskegee Airmen, but they were done for like publicity, brochures. So for this exhibit, it would fall a little flat. So I decided better not to have the image and have it look sad than have it, and just don't want that. Moving on around. Sorry. We have Jesse Leroy Brown, who's an aviator. This painting you probably recognize if you're familiar with him at all, because it's based on a very famous photograph of him in his airplane. This painting is particularly nice because the photograph is black and white, but this one, the artist, got pretty accurate with the colors. So his suit is the right color, his airplane is the right color. So it's a really nice image. He was killed in Korea. His plane crashed, and he died very soon after the impact in North Korea. Another famous African American is right next to him, Carl Brashear, who I met him a couple of times because in the early 1990s, he used to come up every few years to visit his portrait. When we were over at Building 67 and we had the gallery there. Lovely man. You wouldn't notice he had any disabilities that his leg was missing or anything. But he experienced plenty of discrimination when he came into the Navy as a young man, but he persisted against it and overcame it and became a master diver. Not only that, but recertified after he lost limbs while engaged in diving accidents. Right next to it is a portrait of the first female chaplain. 1970s society was changing. Women were being accepted into the clergy, and not to be left behind, the Navy started accepting women into the clergy. This is Diana Pullman. Um, I met her too. Once she came to visit her portrait, and she said she didn't stay in the Navy very long because she said it was pretty rough on her. So, but at the time, the Navy, we had combat artists through the Salmagun Club, and they had this thing going on that when there was a Navy first, they tended to get an artist out to document it. So that's how we got the Carl Brashear portrait and Diana Pullman, done by a very nice artist. Beyond that, there is the, you can be black and navy too. That's a car card. When they're long and skinny, they're called car cards because they go, you know, back in the old days when you rode buses and there were the advertisements up above the windows, those are called car cards, and that's kind of the intention of that shape and size. So that one says you can be black and navy too. That is one of several versions of that sentiment. It dates from towards the end of the Vietnam War, when the draft was going away and we were moving towards an all-volunteer military. About that time, the Navy started up the Navy Recruiting Command. Before that time, recruiting was handled by the Chief of Naval Personnel. And I guess at that point they realized that recruiting needed some special attention, so it was created into a unified command. And they started putting out more socially aware posters, and it included this series here. There is also a series for women. Some of the images for the women are real head scratchers because they talk about personal appearances. It's like, oh, did we miss something here? It's a time that when you're putting together an exhibit on diversity in the Navy, I figured we do have this one. There's so many things we don't have, but we do have this one, and I couldn't ignore it. I just couldn't ignore it. Then moving around to more modern times, we have Al Cisneros, who was the first Hispanic Blue Angel pilot. Again, it's a case of there are probably images, and probably older images, of Hispanic people represented in the Navy art collection. But this was a really good example, and I thought it fit well into the exhibit. On the back wall, we move into modern times. We start with the woman standing next to the submarine up at Groton. That's image is pretty interesting because women in submarine. She wasn't serving on the submarine. She was in the yard with the submarine, taking care of it. It was a time when women were moving into, I won't say combat roles at that point, but there was an expansion of jobs for women. Harry Harris is next to it. Certainly met him on several occasions. Lovely man, groundbreaker, very modest man. You would never know what a significant person he is for the Navy, just talking to him. And then we move into more modern areas. Women on submarines. Then there's the lineup of the women getting ready to do the underway replenishment. Well, it's a line of sailors, and the woman is at the front of the line, let me put it that way. It's very cute that they're all arranged in height order. I'm pretty sure that's the way it happens on ship, but it's probably because height order is probably the most practical way to pull a line. Then there's one of our more recent artists over here, Doug Rowe, documented our first Navy Super Hornet, female Super Hornet pilot. Sorry. Lieutenant Madeline Swagel. First Navy tactical airstrike fighter pilot. First African American female to do so. That is a very recent development, so diversity in the Navy continues even as we speak. The last image, sequentially, if we were going in date order, it probably should have been much earlier in the exhibit, because the scene it depicts, which is basically underway replenishment, but the artist put orange in the waves because to document she witnessed Agent Orange dumping in the sea and wished to protest that fact with the painting. But it's a transgendered person. I mean, she was serving on a Navy ship in the Vietnam War. Okay, I'm gonna tell a tale of myself. I took in the donation, had lovely conversations with her, and finally I decided I wanted to go and get some additional documentation from the cruise books. And I went and I opened the cruise books, and it's like, these are all men. I'm sorry. I am so stupid on many occasions, and that is certainly one of them. Anyway, be that as it may, she wishes to be known as the first transgender artist exhibited by the Navy Art Collection. Oh, let me say her name so she gets the notice. Sharon Lynn Rourke. And so she is. I believe she has since gone into photography and is still working.
Do you know where she lives?
California. Yeah, you know, government records, we might have an old address, but I don't have a current address, so, yeah. But, guys, you've been so patient listening to me natter on. Anybody got any questions? Want to have any discussions? Want to go a little crazy? Yes.
Yeah. Was the Navy or is the Navy combat art program diverse? In terms of artists?
Is the Navy combat art program diverse in any way? We have had female artists working for us. Monica Allen Perrin was the most recent one. She was a reservist, active reserve. We think she's retired. We haven't heard from her in a long time. So we have had women artists. African American artists, actually in the 1990s, Eric Marshall Murray worked for me over in Building 67 for, well, one of his hitches. And we have artwork from him. Yeah. So, yes, probably not as much as we should. Anybody else?
I was just curious about the selection of the poster back there, whether you can be black or maybe too.
Yes.
I'm just curious, when you pick that particular piece out, what went through your mind when you were picking that piece out? I understand that it's a product of its time.
Right.
But given a contemporary context, someone would look at that and say, you know, that seems a little
I get it.
racist to me.
Yes.
The way it's worded.
Yes.
And I was just curious if you kind of had that same feeling. Did that go through your mind?
It did.
When a modern audience comes to them and said that. I don't know what the label says, but I just thought that
Well,
interesting
No, I got it because I told you that that's one of several versions of that. The others kind of put it more in your face. It's like, oh, do I really want this hanging in the Navy Museum where people can see it? Or do I want to shove it under a rug and pretend that this was never an official Navy publication?
I think it was a great choice because it does kind of invoke discussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can say that, just from discussions we've had about that piece on Saturdays, it brings people into the gallery. It does intrigue them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, that one, and well, we can go into storage sometime and pull out that series, and then the ones that they did for the women also, and which are a bit more like, oh, she's beautiful in Navy too. It's like, oh, stop it, stop it. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe down the line, maybe down somewhere down the line, just
You know,
that would be an
do an
interesting.
exhibit of the Navy stepping in it big time. Yeah.
Definitely.
Anyway, yes, let's put all this on the internet, guys. So that's kind of made what I have to say about pulling this exhibit together. You know, there are bigger exhibits on the topic that can be done. Like I say, there would be significant gaps because we don't have the material. Of course, in a bigger museum and a bigger exhibit, we would be borrowing from other institutions. But this is a temporary gallery, by the way. For those watching at home, this exhibit is up only until Labor Day here in the Navy Museum on Washington Navy Yard.
Do you know when your building will be open?
So we're supposed to move back middle of July to middle of August. Thank you guys.